the most underrated team in the NBA. A team that is placed fourth in this year's tough Western Conference with all kinds of competition and elite players coming at them every single night. And a team that's managed to have one of the best defensive stat lines in the league despite all of these elite scorers coming up against them. The team we're talking about today is the Utah Jazz, and why I think they are one of the most underrated teams in the NBA. Let's get right into it. So first off, you have to look at their star player, Gordon Hayward, because he is easily one of the most, if not the most, underrated star in the league. If we look at his stats, 22 points per game, 5.5 rebounds per game, 3.5 assists per game. Just a great all-around player. He's like a white LeBron James, I guess you could say. But this isn't the only thing that shows up on the stat line, or his stat line doesn't fully explain it. He is also one of the most efficient and unselfish stars in the league. He will always give the extra pass, or he'll sometimes give up the stats to put his team in a position to win, along with all of the other players on his team. They have one of the most underrated point guards in the league right now in George Hill, who's averaging around 20 points per game and 6 assists, I believe. Don't quote me on that, but I do think that that is about his stat line. So George Hill, one of the most underrated point guards in the league, and one of the things that I think contributes to this underratedness, if that's a word, is their location. A lot of people overlook Utah, Salt Lake City, because it's not really a vacation destination. It's not a huge market, but that's a shame because they have some of the most exciting players, or not exciting, but most talented players in the NBA. They have one of the most underrated defensive players in the league in Rudy Gobert, who's averaging 2.6 blocks per game, and in my opinion should win Rookie of the Year. And because of Rudy Gobert and all of the other players that have contributed to this defense, they are one of the most underrated defensive teams as well. I hear many people consider the Spurs the best defensive team in the league, and no doubt they are very talented defensively, but when you look at the stats for defensive teams, the Jazz should be considered number one. They're number one in points per game, in opponent's points per game, and number two in opponent field goal percentage, not to mention all of the other top three finishes that they hold among defensive stats. So another thing to look at is their coach, Quinn Snyder. Before researching this video, I didn't even know who he was. I knew the Jazz were underrated. I didn't even know who their coach was, Quinn Snyder. Have you heard of him? I don't think you have. Probably not, unless you're a super diehard NBA or you're a Jazz fan. Quinn Snyder has done an excellent job with his crew. This is his second season, I believe, in the NBA, and he came from the Euro League. He's done a great job with this team, and he definitely doesn't get enough credit. He's not considered for Coach of the Year, even though he's led this team and put together this roster along with the GM that has been able to compete and get the fourth place finish in the Western Conference. Another thing that is underrated about them is that they're great role players and bench. They have all kinds of players that they can put in and put up points on the board or lock down the other team. Another thing to look at is that they're not just beating bummy teams. They beat the Spurs, they beat the Cavs, they beat the Rockets, they beat the Clippers. They've beat all of the top teams in both conferences. And looking at the playoff picture, they could be a real threat to some of the teams, especially the Warriors. So all the pieces to beat elite teams are on the Jazz. They have scorers, they have elite defenders, and the biggest aspect I think that is underrated with the Jazz is their unselfishness. Not all of the players' stats or decisions show up in the stat line, and I think that many of the players on the Jazz are some of the most unselfish players in the league. Gordon Hayward, like I mentioned before, George Hill, all of these players are looking to win and win only. They're not looking to boost their stat lines. They're not looking to get triple doubles. They're not looking to drop 40 points. They're looking to get a win for their team, and I think that that is a huge aspect in championship teams. They have inconsistency sometimes they'll beat teams badly, sometimes they'll lose to a mediocre team. But I think that this is part of the lack of experience / inexperience, and also their lack of chemistry. George Hill was just added, Joe Johnson was just added, Boris Diaw was just added. But I think that these additions were very necessary for the playoffs hopes this year. And even though those inconsistencies and lack of team chemistry show up right now, I think that they have improved it as the year has gone on. And I think that George Hill, Boris Diaw, and Joe Johnson will provide excellent veteran leadership come playoff time. That was another issue with the Utah Jazz, was their lack of playoff experience. But I think that these additions, GM did a great job by adding these players, but these additions have added veteran leadership to the team that can kind of guide the younger guys on what to do in the playoffs, because the Utah Jazz have not been to the playoffs for a while, and I think that this could be the difference between them getting swept and them making it a real series. So, looking at the playoffs, if the Warriors see the Jazz in the second round, if the Jazz can win their first matchup, probably against the Clippers, I think that the Warriors could have a nightmare trying to face up against the Jazz. The Jazz could be the nightmare that the Warriors didn't see coming, and I think that they're definitely one of the most underrated teams coming into the playoffs. Thank you guys so much for watching. Please leave in the comment section below if you think I might, or if not, who you think is the most underrated team in the NBA, and I'll see you in my next video. Thanks.